Let's talk about one invention, just one, but it's responsible for religious reformations, political revolutions, and really the very foundation of the modern world we live in. And no, it's not the computer, it's not the steam engine, it's the printing press. And its story is incredible because it shows how one piece of technology can completely reshape how we think. Now really, take a second and try to picture it. No printed books, no newspapers. Every single word on every single page had to be copied out by hand. A single book could be a scribe's entire life's work. Knowledge wasn't just hard to come by, it was a luxury item, something controlled by a tiny, tiny group of people. For almost everyone else, ideas were something you heard, not something you could actually hold in your hands and read for yourself. And the difference was just night and day. We went from knowledge being this fragile, incredibly expensive treasure for the elite to something that could be copied cheaply, that was durable, and that could be made in huge numbers. This wasn't just a minor upgrade, it was a fundamental rewiring of how information moved through the world, putting it into the hands of a brand new public for the very first time.
So how in the world did this happen? Well, here's our game plan. First, we'll step back into that world before print. Then we'll trace how the key technology started to arrive from the East. We'll meet the main man, Gutenberg, and see how his invention lit the fuse that sparked revolutions across Europe and eventually the entire globe.
So before print, information was power, and that power was kept in very few hands because books were just so rare. Most people lived in a world of sound, not sight. Sacred texts were things you heard in church. Stories were told around the fire. News was shouted out in the town square. Knowledge was this shared, public thing, not a private, silent experience like it is for us today.
But the idea of printing didn't just appear in Europe out of thin air. The key ingredients, the pieces of the puzzle, had actually been slowly making their way west for centuries, on a long, long journey that started thousands of miles away.
Just look at this timeline for a second. The basic ideas had been around for ages. Woodblock printing? That was happening in China way back in 594. Paper, another Chinese invention, gets to Europe along the Silk Road. Even Marco Polo brought back stories of Chinese printing in 1295. So for almost 150 years, all the components were just sitting there in Europe, waiting for somebody to put them together in a new way.
But those older methods, they just couldn't keep up. You see, the demand for books was exploding, thanks to new universities and a growing middle class of merchants. Scribes couldn't possibly copy books fast enough, and carving a unique woodblock for every single page was just agonizingly slow. Europe had this massive thrust for knowledge that the technology of the day simply could not quench. The stage was set for a game changer.
And that big breakthrough came from a guy named Johann Gutenberg in Germany around the 1430s. Now, he wasn't technically the very first person to print, but he was the one who perfected a system that would change literally everything.
Gutenberg was the perfect person at the perfect time. It's like his whole life led up to this. Growing up around wine country, he knew all about presses. From his training as a goldsmith, he had the metalworking skills to create the real game changer: durable, reusable, movable metal type. See, he didn't invent printing out of nothing. He combined all these existing ideas into one devastatingly efficient system. And that's what mattered. 250 per hour. Just let that sink in. A single one of his presses could crank out more in one afternoon than a scribe could produce in months of back-breaking work. This wasn't just a faster horse, this was a rocket ship. It was a total change in the scale of what was even possible.
And the result was a complete information explosion. In just the first 50 years of print, we think about 20 million books were created. That's more than all the scribes in Europe had produced in the 1,000 years before that. And then look at the next century. That number jumped to 200 million. The revolution wasn't coming, it had arrived.
So with books suddenly everywhere, the world started to change, and it changed fast. People's whole relationship with information, with authority, and with each other was totally rewritten. This sparked massive upheavals in religion, politics, really the entire fabric of society.
Yeah, for the first time, you had this large reading public. Ideas could now travel directly to individuals, completely bypassing the traditional gatekeepers like the church or the king. People could read for themselves, think for themselves, and form their own opinions. The whole culture shifted from collective listening to private, individual reading. And maybe nobody understood this new power better than a German monk named Martin Luther. When he nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, he thought he was just starting an academic debate. But then printers got a hold of it. His ideas were copied, translated, and they spread like wildfire all across Germany in a matter of weeks. Without print,
The Reformation might have been just some local argument. With it, it became a revolution that split a continent.
Of course, the authorities immediately saw the danger here. If anyone could print and spread ideas, what was to stop rebellious and irreligious thoughts from getting out there? This fear is exactly why the Roman Church created its Index of Prohibited Books in 1558. It was a desperate attempt to put the genie back in the bottle and regain control.
And this flood of new information didn't just challenge the church, it challenged the state. Print took these radical new ideas from Enlightenment thinkers, their arguments for reason and their attacks on kings, and it turned them into bestsellers. Those books and pamphlets, they became the intellectual fuel for the fire of the French Revolution.
So did it cause it? Well, historians point to three big ways print culture really set the stage. First, it made these new ideas popular. Second, it created a public space where everything could be debated and questioned. And third, it helped spread all this underground literature and these scandalous cartoons that mocked the royalty, which really chipped away at their authority long before the revolution even began.
I love this quote from the novelist Mercier. It just perfectly captures the spirit of that time. The writer, armed with a printing press, was seen as this new, powerful force in the world. People truly believed that print was this unstoppable engine of progress that would just sweep away tyranny. But this revolutionary tech wasn't just a European story, not at all. It spread all over the globe, and when it did, people adapted it for their own unique purposes. Let's just take colonial India as a quick example. So in India, you had these religious scholars, the ulama, who were really worried about the collapse of Muslim dynasties and the influence of the British. So what do? They used these new, cheap printing presses to publish translations of holy texts and thousands of fatwas, those are legal rulings, in local languages to help guide the public and push back against colonial culture. And the impact across all of Indian society was just profound. Print fueled intense religious debates. It gave a platform to social reformers who were writing against the caste system. It opened up brand new worlds for women who could now be writers and readers. And, maybe most important, newspapers started connecting different communities, helping to build the very idea of a single pan-Indian identity. And just like we saw in Europe, the authorities got scared. The British colonial government saw how powerful these local language newspapers were in building a sense of nationalism, and they decided it had to be stopped. So they passed the Vernacular Press Act in 1878, giving them huge powers to censor the local press. And that right there is the ultimate proof of how powerful this tool had become. The printing press didn't just give us cheaper books, it gave us a new way of being human. It rewired society from the bottom up, changing how we learn, how we believe, how we govern ourselves. Which, of course, brings us to today. We are living through our own information revolution. So if Gutenberg's press created the modern world, what kind of world is being created right now by the internet, by social media, by AI? The patterns of history tell us the biggest changes are probably still to come.